So how do you go from one doctor to the next? How do you pass the reins on a franchise? I got no idea. I've never seen it, but is it something momentous, worthy of a special, or is it just like a regular episode, something silly named the Giggles? I guess we'll find out here on this episode of the Implausipod. Welcome to the Implausipod, a podcast at the intersection of art, technology, and popular culture. I'm your host, Dr. Implausible. And in this episode, we'll take a look at the third of three Doctor Who 2023 specials, and I'll be joined shortly by my guest, Dr. Aiden Buckland, where we'll discuss the details, but I'll start with a quick recap of my initial impressions as someone who's been a lifelong sci-fi fan, but never really seen any Doctor Who, aside from the previous two. So with that in mind, let's get right to it with my initial impressions of the Giggles. And I'm going to call an audible here right off the top and bring on our guest right away. Originally, I had recorded about 20 minutes of my first impression, and that's almost enough time for a full episode itself. But there would have been a lot of duplication with the discussion that we would have had after. So in the interest of expedience, let's just get right to it. And without further ado, we'll be joined by our guest, Dr. Aiden Buckland. All right, and we're back with the Giggles, or a mild case at least. I think I've mostly recovered, and joining me here is Dr. Aiden Buckland to once again talk about Doctor Who, our third special of 2023, with some substantial changes happening with our doctors. So I really want to get into it, but welcome, Aiden. Thank you for joining us. Good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. This was an interesting and eventful end to our run of specials for the 60th.
Yeah, for sure. I even as a non-fan, I could kind of sense some of what was going on there. The escalation of the threat, so to speak, that humanity was at stake, and we were seeing a lot of the goings on. I appreciated the episode, even though it started off with something rare for me. I mean, we're in Soho, and for me it was hey, I recognize that guy, which hasn't really happened too much in the three specials we've seen so much. But Neil Patrick Harris is, I'm sure you're aware, I've mentioned to you before, but maybe the viewers aren't aware, he's a bit of my nemesis here. A long time ago, we were giving a talk actually at the Calgary Comic Expo, and we were talking about paratext in video games. Giving an academic talk, and the next hall over was Neil Patrick Harris doing magic tricks and talking about what was the show he did with Wedden, the sing-along blog one?
Oh yes, that would be Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog.
Right. So here he's not a doctor, but he's definitely causing some trouble. So our nemesis, because we had like maybe 6 or 10 people at our talk, and Neil Patrick Harris had him flowing out to the hall, rightfully so. I'm not harshing on NPH here at all. If I was a fan, I would have gone seen NPH too. But thank you to the people that did come see our talk. Much appreciated. But it definitely is coming off with some very creepy vibes here. And then we mentioned the second person that I recognize, or at least a name I recognize. John Baird, who is the inventor of television, and as a communications scholar was like, I've mentioned that name in many classes before. So it was kind of as a cold open, it was a big shock to me, and I just wanted to kind of get your perspective on, say, either or both of those appearances early on.
Always nice to see your next fair use target for those updated lecture notes moving forward, and always nice to see these kinds of milestones. Doctor Who tends to do this from time to time. So in the past, they used the moon landing, for example. And, while positioning it in the narrative, also mention that it is the most watched thing ever to have been on television. So embedded signals abound.
Oh, okay. So this is kind of a repeat, like a thread that they've used as a threat before. Okay.
It feels very in keeping, for sure. They're very consistent with coming back to certain mechanisms.
All right, so we'll, I guess, maybe talk about those mechanisms that they come back to throughout this episode here. But there was one line, I think it was Baird, he was talking about the puppet. It said, imagine if he could talk, what could he say? Which I guess is the setup for the rest of the episode here. And from there, we move right into the credits. And again, it's a Russell T Davies solo joint. and we're taken right into the chaos at the end of the last episode, and it links directly to it. And there was a guy there in the wheelchair that we didn't really talk about, I guess, in Wild Blue Yonder when we were discussing it. But this idea of the, I'll get to it, but yeah, we see this person here. Can you give me a little bit of detail there?
Yeah, that's Bernard Cribbin's character, Wilfred Mott. And it was one of the things I think in this episode I liked the most. It was one of the great surprises for longtime fans in Wild Blue Yonder that we ended with that scene and got to see him again because, of course, as many people know, he passed on, unfortunately, in 2022, I believe. So, the idea that they even had that and have been holding on to it for this long is great. Maybe I'm just blissfully ignorant about this being part of the thing. But you notice, I think, in this episode that we don't ever clearly see him on camera again. So I think that that first scene must have been shot quite early in the game.
Yeah, and so this was maybe a body double or some way to kind of bring that continuity in. Okay, well, that's really cool then that they're still like having those links for older fans that they're bringing in, that we saw in the first of the specials, like bringing everybody together and having that continuity throughout. And that, I think it popped up later on in the episode. There's a bunch of names I didn't recognize, but I'm going to ask you some questions about. Now, from there, we went straight to this. Basically, it was like a man in the street. And seeing as we're talking about TV, they get this guy who's facing down a car explaining things to Doctor Who, and it was like typical of, to me at least, TV opinions. The guy says a few days ago it changed where they get mad if you try and explain otherwise to them. And so they're talking about basically polarization online, but the idea that it was a man in the street interview where we typically see that polarization and the online agenda setting that takes place by the decisions that get made about who to show, what stuff gets included in a news broadcast and what stuff gets excluded. Maybe that was missed by the audience, I don't know, but it was really striking to me that this is how they choose to portray what was going on.
It's really one of those things that I think is, magical about sci-fi storytelling in particular, is to take those very contemporary issues and dissolve them into an absurd, surreal background and really allow things to play out. I liked that connection this week in particular.
Yeah, and so Neil Patrick Harris shows up as a mime in the street while all this chaos is going on, and there's that moment of recognition felt between the Doctor and NPH there. So is there like a lot of history that's connected between these two? Like, would the Doctor Who have recognized him or in this incarnation, or is there that sense that you saw of recognition, or was that something else, or just he was noticing that this is possibly a threat? Yeah,
it's recognition. I think might not be the most accurate term in this case. He is a villain that's existed in the original run of the show. Of course, we saw the footage in this episode of William Hartnell. That's the very first Doctor, and it looked like the footage was either in color or colorized. So that seems to me that it would be late in his run in particular. So it's interesting when they do this sort of thing, where they do kind of deep callbacks, reinvent a character. Oftentimes he won't recognize them at first, but then the big reveal, and of course there is this deep relationship. They've encountered each other in an episode or two.
Okay. So then from there we have that bit with Unit coming in and keeping the family safe is kind of the admonition. But we come into this massive overhead shot, I thought, of the Chinooks carrying the TARDIS towards this tower. And I don't know if like the Chinooks were CGI, or if all of it was CGI and then there was just some compositing, or if they actually did an overhead shot of London like that. But it felt movie scale to me. Like you don't normally see overhead exterior shots in any kind of TV show, even like outside of like an HBO kind of premium TV kind of thing. Was there a sense of that scale there, or? No,
it's definitely something that I think has been noticeable in this return. There's definitely some money in the budget, and like I say, continuity-wise and aesthetic-wise, I think you could make that argument from the Chibnall era as well. So this is the person who was running the show previously. The show has looked more polished in a lot of ways for a while now. It's just with these specials, this is the 60th anniversary, so with the milestone, they're putting a bit more money in there. But they tend to do this from time to time, like the season of specials, which is what leads up to the transition from 10 to 11, is one where instead of doing a run of episodes, what they did was just 2 or 3 two-parters packaged as like a TV movie.
All right, and so they bring into this. And then we meet Kate Lethbridge Stewart at what I had in my notes is called Avengers HQ, because I can't think of any other way of describing that they're on this platform at the top of a tower, which, again, in London, I don't know if you've ever been, but London is kind of a city devoid of like skyscrapers, or at least the little bit of it that I saw. So it really kind of stuck out that they had this thing. But she comes up with this line, how do we fight the human race? And I guess we have, again, our stakes have been raised, that we know what the scope of this is here. Is Kate Lethbridge Stewart, is she a returning character, or is this somebody new again?
Yeah, she's a kind of a deep cut reference. So she, in canon, is the daughter of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, who was a character from the original run when they first introduced UNIT. So he was like the liaison with the Doctor and UNIT. And he was actually someone who got mentioned oftentimes, again, with a show that's been running this long. They will make reference to or pay homage to those who have passed on. And when the actor who played Lethbridge Stewart originally did pass, they used that as part of one of the plots. A really nice scene with Matt Smith basically calling him up to go for a drink and finding out, unfortunately, he's passed, which is those neat callbacks that they tend to do in New Who.
I'm glad to see that they're at least aware of it. Like, some shows feel like there's always a tension, right, between like fan service, like how deeply are you catering to the fans and those that are really paying attention to it, or how much is that like a burden to the story writing and the creativity that kind of has to flow. Like it feels like Who, through the way they do the regenerations, and it's set up narratively that they can do that homage, they can have those deep cuts, where some other shows, it would start feeling like really, really weird if they kept going on or kept coming back to the same well. Probably something like a Supernatural or anything else that's run forever starts to feel that way after a little while. But here, yeah, it feels organic and natural, even if it's like a bit of the gang's all back together kind of thing, and there's this deep history that I'm not aware of, but it's continuing on. We also meet Melanie here, and I think Donna remarks that another redhead or something like that. And you had mentioned last episode that the Doctor wanted to return as a ginger, so this seems to be an ongoing theme here as well. But Melanie, who is Melanie here?
Yeah, so this is a companion who's from the original run. She was with both the 5th and the 6th incarnation of the Doctor, and this is something that tends to happen in the run of the character, is that you'll usually have a companion that carries over from one Doctor to the next. This sounds like it might not be the case for us this Christmas, but we'll see. The Doctor's companion is always something that is something they're always juggling. So,
okay,
who we get at Christmas could be the ongoing companion, or could be just a one-off.
Gotcha. So there's a lot more companions than Doctors,
or both,
right?
Yeah, he usually has 2 or 3 people with him.
Okay, so there's a much bigger cast of characters than necessarily I'm seeing in this, just the limited range of these few specials here. So the discussion that's taking place at Avengers HQ here is about this virus that's spreading around and the virality of it. And in the main line of the podcast, I talked a few weeks ago about spreadable media, the Henry Jenkins's and others' idea of, not necessarily virality, but the way that media gets shared and goes around. And we have this kind of this underlying theme of this show. But the question I had was, they talk about how it's spreading everywhere at the same rate, but I guess this rang a little false to me, in that if we have television adoption is not like, it's a lot of places, but it isn't worldwide, right? And there's places that have large adoption, places that have less, even though cell phone adoption, smartphone adoption has kind of bridged the gap in countries that maybe didn't have a traditional landlines or, even a strong television presence. That one was just really a big kind of hole to me, that why would this be everywhere all at once? I don't know what your thought is there, but I imagine it's similar.
It's one of those cheats. So I believe in the episode he mentions that it's embedded in all screens, and even that is, nonsensical when you know anything about the history of the development of these technologies like computer screens and televisions, developed drastically differently. That's a bit of one of those leaps that you sometimes have to take in a Doctor Who episode. I found in Star Beast the same thing when they shut off the dagger drive and all of the crevices in the earth start to repair themselves and all those streets start to knit themselves back together.
Yeah, we get a little bit of sense of the consequence, I think, here later in the episode. But again, I mean, there was also like a plane crash and mass chaos and obviously violence has been taking place even with 2 days. I mean, I'll tell, just as an aside to the audience, I think within any sci-fi show, there's like one big lie you can tell. And it might be, oh, we have time travel, or we have faster than light, or, aliens are real, or whatever. And then you have your willing suspension of disbelief that will carry you so far through, okay, I can believe in faster than light travel or time travel or whatever. And if the rest of the story makes sense based on that premise, you're like, okay, I'm with it. But if they break that willing suspension of disbelief, then you're out, right? So I was challenged a little bit on some of these points here, but I was still able to buy in. But it's like why I've kind of tuned out of the MCU to a large extent, because I can't still wrap my head around the snap. And I'm figuring that would be like a society ending event if 50% of the people kind of just disappeared. And for 5 years, I'm like, there is not a society to come back to if that happens. So I kind of, whatever that gets mentioned in newer MCU properties, I kind of just gone. But for the show here, back on topic, I was able to still continue on, and we had this idea. We meet Vlinx and the description of the Zedex, which is used to block it. And again, I don't know, has Vlinx been around for a while, or is that a new guy?
Nope, new to me at least. This is my first time seeing the Vlinx. So, and this is something that they have done quite a bit in the New Who era. So UNIT is the old organization from the original run of the show. For a little while in the new era, there was an organization called Torchwood. And both organizations essentially serve the same purpose to, be like SWORD in the Marvel Universe.
Okay.
And protect us from all of those out there that want to do harm.
Okay, gotcha. So they're offensive rather than defensive, SWORD versus than SHIELD, so UNIT versus, or UNIT's kind of both. It's double-edged.
Torchwood is probably a whole nother rabbit hole to dive down. There's a character that they spin off of the first season from Russell T. Davies, who in a lot of ways is kind of like the opposite of the Doctor. So he ends up being the central part of that show. So it's kind of like their first successful spin-off.
Oh, cool.
In the new era.
Okay. We'll have to check that out at some point. So through all this discussion at Avengers HQ, UNIT HQ, they talk about the satellite. They figure out the arpeggio that's behind all the screens. They have this idea. Now, for the Canadian connection, I guess, there's a Canadian movie by the name of Pontypool, which was done by one of the kids in the hall. And that was that idea of like a mimetic virus as well. It turned everybody in that movie into like zombies, but it was spread by voice. And so here we have the giggling, which is going through the screens, which again, willing suspension of disbelief, but they get to the idea that they're looking for a puppeteer. There was a point there after Kate did the thing where she took off the Zedex, where they're having this discussion. Now, she was very kind of angry and hostile with the people in UNIT and made some comments, and then she was apologetic about it after. And then we have the Doctor kind of being hostile to all the humans in the area. He's going, you're using your intelligence to be stupid. And did you get the sense that the Doctor was being affected by the madness as well, or is he just always sometimes kind of rude? Like, I can't tell.
It is one of the things I think that's pretty enduring through most of the actors that play him. He's at the same time fascinated with us as a planet and as a species, as he is often disappointed. I mean, most of quite a lot of the villains end up being human from some era, so he's often disappointed with what we can end up doing. But for the most part, this kind of scolding tone tends to come from him fairly often.
Okay, so I guess it's done to set apart that he is an alien. I mean, he may be in human form, but he is not, human at all. So yeah, we get that sense that he is other from, the rest of the the companions or unit or the rest of humanity, even though he does care for them. So from there, we have a little bit more of the banter going around, but their discussion about Baird's invention, I was wondering when I saw it, because they mentioned it was like on the 25th or in 2025, and it had been 98 years. And I think it was actually in 2026. I went and checked some of the history texts after. So we're close to history, even if we're not exactly on. But that's just kind of a fun fact for anybody who might be listening, that we're not quite exactly there, but it's pretty close. So they go back to Soho 1925, and I mean the Doctor and Donna, and we get another one of those brief interludes where they're actually able to have a conversation, but she says that they're never able to have a conversation, that he is busy every second of every day, staggering along. And I guess it strikes me of something that would be in, not Doctor Who, I guess, because I'm new to that, but where you have a time traveler who's continually going out time and time and time again, whether it's in a novel like Forever War or something even like Time Cop or Bill and Ted's or what have you, is this sense that, or even Back to the Future, like the sense that the entirety of Marty's adventures basically took place within, a couple hours of elapsed time back on Earth. And again, this ties back to the Rick and Morty equation, like how many adventures do they have between them appearing and disappearing, where sometimes weeks happen for them and then they come back to it. But so the Doctor is having this sense that the entirety of the Doctor's run, whether it's New Who or from whatever given point back in time there, he's never stopped. It's you can binge watch the entire Doctor Who run, and you're seeing it in like real time for the Doctor, right? And it's been constant. There's never been that moment's breadth. So I just wanted to kind of get your sense on that one a little bit, of what that means for Doctor Who, the character, and as portrayed by David Tennant here as the 14th Doctor.
Yeah, I think this is one of my biggest question marks coming out of these 3 episodes in particular is, what does this mean for the new Doctor, Ncuti Gatwa? Is Doctor number 15 somehow, rehabilitated and he's rehabbed these problems and he's not going to carry this weight? Because this is definitely something that's been a common characteristic of all the New Who Doctors. For the most part, they carry this burden. So it starts with Eccleston in the very first season. He is very much fresh out of the Time War, which is this narrative device they use for several of the first few seasons in the background as kind of a meta plot. So this is the original sin of the New Who era for the Doctor. This is horrible event that affected so many different species, and this is the weight he carries. But then, as the show unfolds, of course, it's the old adage for television, you write characters that people really love and then do mean things to them. So you get season after season, one tragedy piled on top of another tragedy, which always seems to leave, and especially Tennant in particular, always seems to leave him in kind of sad Doctor phase where he's not really sure if he wants to hang out with people anymore, and he's not sure if he's really fit to be around people, because a lot of people around him tend to die or sacrifice themselves to save him.
Yeah, okay. We get that played up here a little bit further along, and we don't have to necessarily go chronologically. I think with the 15th Doctor, Ncuti Gatwa, he kind of mentioned that near the end of the episode, that, he was the Doctor who had time to recoup and recover a little bit, and that's kind of what brought him out. And then the 15th Doctor is the Doctor that's recovered. I thought that was mentioned explicitly in the text. And we get into that idea of the loss that he's felt just a few moments later, after they go through the Hall of Doors, and the Doctor has to challenge with all the laws I cling to gone, and the fact that he's facing the rather quick consequences of his actions with the superstition at the edge of the universe when he did salt in the previous episode there in the Wild Blue Yonder, as what has allowed the toy maker to actually come in. They have that scene at the puppet show where these previous companions are being shown as being played for puppets, and they each meet a kind of end, a purgatory, or some other thing, and the Doctor tries to explain all of them away, and he says, well, that's all right then. There's an explanation for it, but I don't know like, I don't have any connection to it, but it sounds like the fates of some of the companions were kind of horrible here if we stop to think about it. And is the Doctor continually running away from his actions in this, or is he, and this is where he's being forced to confront them, or like what's kind of going on with it?
It's one of the things I think is interesting about the character is that you're absolutely right. He is running away constantly. It's kind of what drives him to keep moving forward. And, everywhere he lands, he's right in the middle of one of these adventures. So he's too busy to ever really deal with himself. Like oftentimes in several iterations, actually, in the New Who era, when a character is asking him to reflect on the kinds of things he's been through, he'll immediately turn it to whatever the puzzle of the week is to solve, or, spit out a new theory about how they're going to solve this week's monster. Always deflecting, never wanting to reflect, which is an interesting way to, I guess, bifurcate the character. So I guess David Tennant gets to hang out with the family and have all the sadness, and Ncuti Gatwa gets to fly around all of time and space.
Sorry, for the listeners, you wouldn't have seen that, but the light bulb just came on over my top of my head. So are we, could we be in a sense where, I mean, I know you've mentioned how things get all timey-wimey, so could Tennant's Doctor Who, the moment that he's having with the family, could that be him recouping, and then, Ncuti Gatwa is, that Doctor... Like the bifurcation that they have, or the bi-regeneration, is kind of dissociated in time. So the 14th Doctor gets that time to kind of recover, and then it'll tie up again at some point in the future. That we'll see that change kind of come about. That turns into the 15th Doctor at a future date. It's kind of like they did a time loop there, and it'll link back at some point in the future, maybe near the end of Ncuti Gatwa's run. I'm assuming he'll have a season or 3 like all the Doctors do. But yeah, anywho, I just a thought. I'll throw that out there.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see. I believe Russell T Davies has done an interview or two talking about kind of how this was a choice that he had made very early on in the creative process, that this was always kind of the end goal, to have 2 Doctors at the end of it. And we've had other incidents. The Meta Crisis, which came up in the first episode, Starbeast, is another one of those where a sort of part of him or whatever was causing an issue because of the duplicate being there. So it's an interesting choice, I think, moving forward. And it'll be interesting to see how much they lean into it. Like we've already seen in the 50th, the Day of the Doctor, probably the most robust attempt to get all of the Doctors in the same place at the same time in one episode. So, and this is kind of the tradition. So this is the first time we've seen the Doctor meet a future incarnation. Well, that's not true, but spoilers.
Okay.
But in terms of working with a future incarnation, this is the first time we've seen that happen, which is questionable, I guess, given their game of ball.
Yeah. Speaking of the game of ball, and well, I guess the games that are going to come up here, there's one other event that kind of happens in the Hall of Mirrors I just want to touch on, and then we can kind of fast forward to that game. Donna had a bit that she said was from her grandpa, I think, and she says, "Dice don't know what the dice did last time. Games don't have a memory. Every game starts from scratch." And it was like, I had to pause and make sure I got that correctly. But I mean, from, we talked a little bit of our impressions about television from like a, comms perspective, but we're also, if we talk about it from like a game studies perspective, or that one also kind of really jumped out at me, because from like a statistical rationale, it's true. Dice don't know what the dice did last time. But games are more than just dice. And so I think saying that games don't have a memory is like a stats 101 kind of thing. If you're shuffling cards or rolling dice, or saying, okay, we're looking at repeated rolls, there's no history there. But if we're looking at anything more complex than that, then that's not the case, because you have that meta knowledge, that meta awareness that can influence the decisions of the players. And even for a statistical game like cards or poker or what have you, there's skilled players that are better able to play the odds and the likelihood. Even though there's a highly random element to it, there's still skill involved, right? So there's history there, and there's, even if it's unstated. So what's your thought about this from like a games perspective?
I was really interested in this idea of play as an elemental force that was neat to me. It's one of the things when you read this literature, you go all the way back to the 30s with Huizinga, who basically positioned play as that thing that is, transcendental. It transcends the human species. It's something you don't have to teach a kitten or a puppy how to play. They come hardwired with that ability. And this is kind of the way I read the dice line, that idea that when you're in a game, you are essentially in your own little magic circle, which is, again, another concept from that text in the 30s, is this idea that, the magic circle gives everything inside of it new meaning. So their game of ball was very much, a life and death struggle because of the way they had agreed to set up the rules.
Yeah. One of those rules was best of 3, which, I guess, again, ties back into some of those elemental rules. And they said it was like order, chaos, and play. And they kind of elevated the toy maker as an avatar of play, though I will say he kind of felt like an avatar of chaos as well, to like this elemental force. If I was going to use like a Marvel analogy, it would be like a Beyonder or a Galactus or, something, or one of the Celestials. He was kind of brought up to that level and I don't know if that felt true to me. I mean, obviously he was able to cause worldwide havoc, but again, I'm not entirely sold on play as an elemental force. I think it's maybe universal, but not elemental. I can't quite say, but this tied directly into our Spice Girls moment. And speaking of rules of play, I love the Spice World thing as a whole, Spice Girls thing as a whole. We had like so many cute little bits within it. He turned the 2 guards into balls or balloons, and then Doctor Who said, "No, I'm sorry, they're dead." There will be a callback there to a little bit. But we had the American Beauty moment in the middle of the floor while he's kind of doing the thing with he's making an angel in all the petals that were shooting out of the guns, because he's able to manipulate atoms with the power of thought, I think was how the Doctor described it. And then he instantly negated that as being his power, that his power is greater than that. But that again ties into that Marvel molecule man kind of level of power that we kind of see. But within that concept of play, it struck me that the only ones that are playing are the Doctor and the toy maker. And if we're thinking of play, especially our rules of play, as something that requires consent for everybody to participate. We talk about how games would have like a gaming rule 0 or, rules of play that might be set up beforehand, especially in like a tabletop or live action scenario like we're seeing here, where everybody agrees to the rules. For a lot of the members of unit or the, ancillary characters, it doesn't seem like they consented to the same rules that the toy maker and the Doctor are playing at. And I guess maybe that's that clash of elemental forces. But is everybody else subject to the toy maker but not able to say whether they want to play or not? I don't know. That kind of struck me as odd. But I'd like to get your thoughts about the whole basically Spice Girls montage and going forward there.
Solid montage. I think generally the toy maker is one of these characters. I think I'd mentioned one in the previous episode there, where he's essentially a god from a different bubble universe, which the Doctor accidentally tripped into one day when he was in the first incarnation that we've seen on TV. So that's, for me, kind of what explains his power level in general. And I thought it was interesting and telling as well of the character, especially, again, the Tennant character, that his solution to the problem is to offer him, infinite play. Let's take off. I've got a time machine. Let's just go play across the universe and be celestial, which was something that we've seen him offer before, again, because his solutions are rarely to try to eliminate the antagonist. It's usually to try to contain or to satisfy or to resolve.
Yeah, so this idea that the solution was, I think, infinite games. He critiques him. He goes, "Why are you so small? Why are you just dealing with this one planet where we can, play across the universe?" And I think the toy maker said something to the fact that, humans are fascinating. They make games out of putting bricks on other bricks, which I guess was like a Tetris or Candy Crush kind of reference. But yeah, I guess there's always that anthropic conceit in any sci-fi show about like, why does humanity matter? And it ties into the MCU and so many other shows as well. But yeah, they're able to bring that out. And then we have the battle on the the deck here with the galvanic beam and the rest going on. And from there, we see the Doctor struck, and then something odd happens, and we get this bi-generation. And I'll just pause right there for myself. Okay, I want your full take about the bi-generation, because this is the first regeneration I've ever seen on screen. So take it away. Let me know what you think.
Definitely a unique one. And this is something that we've become accustomed to, and I guess from the original run you would be as well for the most part, that when the Doctor is, mortally wounded, he will turn into a brand new person in general. So we've seen this before. We've seen this particular Doctor, the 14th when he was the 10th, go through a similar issue where essentially, he has to make a choice, and that leads to his ultimate demise, which is interesting. I think there's two things that are happening here which are fascinating. The first is this seems to be, in a lot of ways, a kind of safety lever or pressure valve, I think. So when the show made the choice in the previous iteration to make the Doctor female character, something that had been established in the canon long before, that Time Lords can present as male or female, there was, a section of the fan base who, were engaged in kind of dumping on the show because of Jodie Whittaker inhabiting the role. So in some sense, this seems to be a way for that section of the fan base, so those ones that came back just for Tennant and who decide for reasons that they don't want to continue on with the new Doctor, that they have their Doctor, which troubles me, I think. In particular, I think that that's one of the interesting things about this property and this character, is that they change, and as a fan, you just have to kind of accept that. So it's one of the things that I think, for me as a fan, I really came on board when Matt Smith became the Doctor. So for me, he's my Doctor. He's the one that, I got into the show for, or at the same time that he was the main character. So it is, a little bit irksome, I guess. Like, why is it that this Doctor gets to come back and then split off and get his own, I don't know, spin-off? Are we going to see a David Tennant, Catherine Tate, a Doctor Who special again sometime, next year around this time? Or, is this something that, Davies has a plan for and will be resolved? So, maybe bi-generation eventually results in them popping back together at some point in some, dramatic event.
Yeah. Okay, and what was the second? You said there was a couple things.
Well, this one was, I think, interesting in that his final line, Allons-y, was better in terms of the one he had from the last one. But in both of these regenerations, there is a kind of critique I have of the 10th/14th Doctor to not so much overstay his welcome, but as he's leaving the stage, he does so in such a way that it makes it difficult for some of his fans to, accept this next Doctor. So in the episodes where he is leaving the show for the first time as the 10th Doctor, he has a conversation with, Wilfred Mott about how regeneration works and how it's essentially like him dying and you never get to see him again. So really ramps up the stakes so that when regeneration happens in those specials, it's a really devastating moment and you're really sad and kind of angry that this new guy shows up. Similarly, for me as a Matt Smith fan, when Matt Smith leaves the show after his few seasons and, Peter Capaldi comes in as his replacement, it took me a while to get used to Capaldi as the Doctor and the choices that he was making as an actor in that role.
And it's interesting to know, just I don't know if you would have seen this, but in the subtitles, because again, I had to throw those on, basically for every moment after the bi-generation, when Tennant is on screen, he's subtitled the 10th Doctor, and Shudigatwa is the 15th. So I don't know how much oversight Disney would have, or even the showrunners would have, on the titling of the subtitle text, but this is how it was labeled. So maybe that's just an artifact of whoever was doing the subtitles, but it came across as, that maybe there was something more behind the scenes, or maybe that's just who the subtitler recognized. That's, again, maybe a meta comment.
It is one of those things that has some potential to it, right? Like, if that change happened, it would have had to be approved by numerous people. So I think, definitely an explicit choice. And I think that makes sense that this is not the 14th Doctor. This is now, this bi-generated Doctor, who is actually the 10th. So maybe Shooty's going to spit one out every season that he's in the show. That would be kind of cool. Like, have a Tom Baker show back up, all aged up.
Well, that would be amazing to see. Yeah, for sure. There was a comment about the Toymaker said about his legion is coming, or his legions are coming. So maybe we need a legions of Doctor to to deal with the threat at some unspecified point in time. So then we do have the game of ball here, in which the combined Doctors are able to defeat the Toymaker, and as he falls, there was a couple events that happened. One, the gold tooth. Was there any significance to that? I didn't quite catch who was captured in the gold tooth.
Yeah, it came across in a line of dialogue. It is also one of the things that it has my radar going in terms of, what is going on with this by generation, because earlier in the episode, the Toymaker references all of the other people that he's defeated since he's gotten to our universe, and one of them was the Master, who is an evil Time Lord, who the Doctor has been basically... The Master is to the Doctor what Moriarty is to Sherlock, or what the Joker is to Batman. They are, mortal enemies who are also kind of friendish. It's a long, complicated relationship.
Okay, we don't have to untangle that here, but there isn't a definite association with the gold tooth then. And then as that was happening and he's getting put into the toy box, Kate comes back and asks for the names of the staff, like anybody who was affected or was tossed off the edge. So that, I guess, care that she shows towards and compassion towards the members of UNIT that are, she's responsible for, kind of came through there, and that kind of struck me as well, that they didn't have to, and often we don't see that recognition of the human events in a lot of the sci-fi shows that we talked about, so that kind of came through. I kind of want to get then to the finish, that we get this compassion between the 15th Doctor and the 14th and or 10th. There's a very compassionate hug that Ncuti Gatwa gives Tennant there, as he's recognizing like the weight and the struggle that Tennant's been going through, the never stopping that's kind of led up to this point. And that idea of rest then, that Ncuti Gatwa says that we're Time Lords, we can rehab out of order. So I get that sense that the 15th Doctor is rested and perhaps in better shape or better suited to handle some of the challenges that are coming. But a lot of the denouement was about Donna telling the Doctor, the 14th Doctor, how to keep on going now that this event has happened. And the live day after day to keep on going to, that's just, you got to do what you got to do. And did this lead into them figuring out why he had changed his face, or why the face came back? I guess I think it was mentioned, but did you catch that?
Yeah. So narratively, they haven't really explained it yet, but the production reason is this idea that generally multiverses are now understood by most audiences. So this is now Russell T Davies' way of kind of introducing that kind of concept into the Doctor Who universe. The kind of weird part for me as a Doctor Who fan, again, you can go back to most of the anniversaries and they have, a multi-Doctor event where whoever is the Doctor plus everybody that came before them usually shows up. And that seemed to be easy enough to do. It to split off an older David Tennant now to go be an older version of the 10th Doctor to kind of live out his retirement seems a little strange for the character, just because, in terms of a narrative device, it's not really necessary. The Doctor can show up in his own time stream, or there are moments in time that multiple versions of himself are attracted to that, that's enough of an explanation to have more than one of them on screen. Like, David Tennant was on screen during Matt Smith's era at one point.
All right. Was there anything else about, like, the recuperation that you kind of stuck out for you there?
I think it'll be interesting to see where this goes again for what we get out of it as a fan base, because it does seem, just from the conversation around the table that, even though he's taking it a little easy, clearly they're still going places and they're still popping off here and there in his TARDIS. So we'll see if we don't have another, special or two in the future with the 10th Doctor.
Yeah. And then that thing you just mentioned there, that his TARDIS. So we get the doubling of the TARDISes, let's just say TARDISes at the end there. And one of them is wheelchair accessible. So now we have that option that there should be this duplication of them, that each Doctor has a TARDIS for whatever they get up to. The 10th Doctor there, the 14th Doctor said he doesn't get to see it often. So as Shudigatwa is leaving with it, that dematerialization that takes place as the TARDIS leaves. But any thoughts on the duplication of the TARDIS there?
Yeah, my one disappointment there was I was kind of hoping that when he opened the door, we got to see his TARDIS. So the TARDIS, like the Doctor, will regenerate from time to time. It's not as rigid as, every time there's a new Doctor, there's a new TARDIS. Some Doctors have had multiple insides. Tennant, though, for his entire run had the same one, so it would have been nice to see that. I understand. I mean, it'd be expensive to rebuild that thing.
Yeah, set design being what it is, and the complexity of that one, or the size of it. I mean, I'm sure it takes up a fair chunk of a soundstage to put that all in one place. Yeah, so, okay, that's fantastic. We've been talking a little bit longer than normal here, but I'm sure we'll be able to get it all together and out for people. Did you have any closing thoughts here? And we'll just kind of wrap things up here.
Well, I guess I'll end on a question. Do you think that this is enough to entice you now to be tuning into the Christmas special? This will be Shudigatwa's first outing as the Doctor.
Okay, Christmas special? Yes. I'll be happy to, shortly after Festivus, I will bust out the screen, and the screen has been thoroughly removed. The toy maker is no longer in the screen, so I think it'll be safe to watch the Christmas special, and we can check that out. I'm not going to commit to, maybe we can touch base at one point during the next season or something, but let's meet for the Christmas special for sure, and then we'll see how it goes. There's other threads that are taking place on the podcast here, so again, we're not necessarily Doctor Who focused, but let's have that discussion, and we can come back and check in with the 15th Doctor, maybe intermittently throughout the season if time permits. That sounds good by me anyways. Does that work for your schedule coming up here?
For sure.
Awesome. All right. Well, once again, Dr. Aiden Buckland, thank you for joining us. We will wrap up our introduction and or long exposure to Doctor Who with the third of the 3 2023 specials. Again, Dr. Aiden Buckland can be reached at doctoraidenwho@gmail.com. I'll put the link up in the show notes. And you can reach me at doctorimplausible@implausipod.com or out on Mastodon or whatever socials I might be floating around on. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you shortly around Christmas time. Take care, everybody. Have fun.